I am going to complete StarCraft using this strategy guide from 1998. I have played this game so many times. It is truly incredible. The story is amazing, and I've never gone through it using the strategy guide. So I thought it could be an interesting and unique challenge to go through the game specifically following this strategy guide and everything that is inside of it, and not really being able to stray from that. And I am curious to see how this unfolds, and I would like to have everyone join me if they feel like it. So I think we're set to jump into the game. Here is that beautiful campaign selection screen, something that I will never forget because of how this looks. It is iconic to me. I could watch this for 30 minutes, but we will not be doing that because it's time to go through StarCraft by the guide. And here we are, jumping right in to the Terran Campaign, which is incredible, as is the entire campaign for StarCraft. So, as we see on the title card here, in a decade since something called the Guild Wars. Now, this is a little bit different than the Guild Wars that you might see on the screen right now. That's a different game entirely and with a different company. But, interesting side note, there is something in Guild Wars, a race specifically, it's the enemy race, they're called the Char. And that is spelled with two R's. Now, in StarCraft, you'll see on the screen here that there is a planet called Char, which the Zerg inhabit. And I took this little excerpt from the StarCraft wiki. So I don't know how that happened. For sure, StarCraft was developed first, Guild Wars was second, but StarCraft is in the future, so maybe the Char somehow evolved into a planet? I don't know. But anyway, going back to the Terran campaign here, we see that the Terran Confederacy is described as being oppressive, and we see that 4 days ago, a large alien fleet warped out of nowhere and laid waste to one of the Confederate colonies called Chowsara. Now, the Confederacy, fearing that that alien fleet will target another colony called Marsara, they've sent us in, acting as a magistrate, to safeguard the colonists and to help stop them from panicking any further. And that's exactly where the campaign picks up from. And on this next title page, we see that the mission is called Boot Camp. And we see that we're at the Marsara colony, as mentioned in the last title screen, and the year is set in 2499. Now, I do remember seeing this for the first time in 1998. Absolutely incredible when I saw that as just a kid. I felt like it blew me away because at least back then, I don't know if it was just the games that I had played, but I didn't really seem to find things that looked so realistic, and this just filled me with such a sense of awe and wonder with what I was just about to experience. And here we are, the mission debriefing screen, which, personal side note, a favorite memory of mine as a kid because I remember loving this so much. It has so much atmosphere. We see there's some sort of a human-looking AI cyborg speaking to us. We also see a spinning hologram or holographic planet on the right. Just incredible. But the story, we find out that the Protoss, another race in this game, just attacked the Confederate colony. That's who did that. Now, because of that, we're introduced to a character called General Duke, and he's letting us know that we have 48 hours to put the colonists in the outlying wastelands. And you can kind of get a sense of his character based on this line here.
You're to relocate your core colonists to the outlying wastelands. Now, I know there won't be any problems with these new arrangements.
We're also told to meet a character called Marshal Jim Raynor, which also brings me to the objectives on the bottom left. We'll see we need to find Raynor, build a barracks, and train 10 Marines. With that, let's jump into the mission. Here we are, officially into the first mission of StarCraft for the Terran campaign. So with that, let's go ahead and pull up the strategy guide and take a look at the map. Now here, we can see mission 1 called Wasteland. Let's see, we start in the top left corner thanks to these nice and bright white arrows that go ahead and lead us down, and we can see there's a couple of circles around the map where there are Zerglings, and we are going to meet Raynor about halfway through. We see in the bottom middle that there's also a base. So okay, perfect. With that, let's go to the battle strategy, which we can see here that the author tells us to divide our troops into two groups, Marines and SCVs, move the Marines toward the command center. Okay, perfect. Well, I do want to mention that it's pretty insane with this author. His name is Bart, and he actually had no help when he was doing this in terms of Googling, because he made this in 1998 from as far as I know. And in the beginning of the book, he thanks multiple people such as developers and designers over at Blizzard at the time who helped him come up with the strategies, because the game was still, I believe, not released at that time. So he had to actually speak with people creating the game in order to come up with every strategy we'll see, which I think makes this all the more special that he got these strategies from people that made the game. Really, really interesting. And now that we're back into the game, I select my units into two separate groups, just like the guide tells us to do. And I just have to point out, can we say how absolutely beautiful the water here looks? This is 1998 that these graphics came out. It's just crazy. They did such an amazing job. Coming up here, as we move our troops, it's an infamous line now in StarCraft for most people that played it.
Howdy, boys. I'm Jim Raynor, Marshal of these parts.
Now, one thing you might notice while we're playing this mission is, do we really only need to build 10 Marines? And something that the mind might come in to say when you think about that is, well, this is boring, isn't it? And on one level, you could say that, yes, it is a little bit slow to do something like that, but when they were originally creating this game, I have to imagine that the people creating it thought, okay, if somebody has never played a strategy game before, this might be their very first one. How do we introduce them to it? And when you have something where somebody maybe has never played before, I think this is a great way to introduce it in a very slow manner so somebody doesn't have very much to think about. All they have to do is move down, kill a couple of groups of Zerglings that are on the way, and then they can build all the units that they want. Now, something that's nice that they added into this mission to try and make it a little bit more interesting for people that are more familiar is the groups of Zerglings that are around the map. And that's something that the guide even tells us is not something that has to be done, but we can do it if we like to. And that's something that, of course, I'm going to do in this just to spice it up a little bit. But again, I think it's a nice design decision, at least given the time when they created this. Something else that ties into that new player experience is the barracks here. The advisor tells us, hey, you just built a building that can train Marines. And that's a really nice little touch for new players. We also see in the top left, there's a Marine counter, shows 5 out of 10. Another little touch for the new player experience here, Jim Raynor, the hero, is in a vulture, which is mechanical, and it can be repaired, as you see on the screen here. That's really nice for new players who maybe used Jim to go around the map and clean up those Zerglings in case he takes any damage. We also just completed our 10th Marine, and with that, we get a victorious message, and then we can go on to the score screen, and that concludes Mission 1. Hooray, we made it, everyone! Now we move on to Mission 2. And this is called Backwater Station. Now, right away from Raynor, which, okay, I know earlier I was saying Jim Raynor, James Raynor. I'm probably going to get that mixed up quite a bit, so I think I'm just going to try and stick with Raynor going forward and see how that works out. So, Raynor tells us that according to the last mission, he was able to get the refugees saved and they're in a safe spot, so that is perfect. But while he's telling us that, we all of a sudden get a priority alert that somewhere called Backwater Station is under attack by unknown aliens. And that's when we have Duke come into play, and he lets us know they've already received the distress beacon from Backwater, and they'll take care of it. And he says in a completely relaxed way that you just sit tight and we'll be notified if anything needs to come up or you need to know. So of course, Raynor, hearing that, feels how wrong that is and says that, okay, if we wait for the Confederates, then that station is going to be completely destroyed. So we need to head out there right now in order to help people and save them. That's where the mission kicks off from, which we can see in the bottom left that we need to just eradicate the unknown alien organisms, and of course, Raynor must survive. As we jump on into mission 2 here, we can see that Raynor says he's glad to see us, and you know what, Raynor? We're glad to see you too, because you're an awesome character, so looking forward to playing the game with you some more here. But before we do that, we can see he says even, whoa, okay, he wants us to kick some serious butt. Okay, well, Raynor, hang on just a moment because we need to pull up the mission map. So for mission 2, here we can see in the bottom left that there is a start location, and according to the white arrows, we have a couple of Zerg areas that we need to move to. There's Backwater Station in the top left, and then we go from there over to the right-hand side where there's some more Zerg area and infested command center that we need to take out. So, okay, perfect. Well, now that we have that in the map, let's go over to the resource management portion, where it looks like we just need to do 3 separate things that are pretty easy. So we need to begin by sending an SCV to the north in order to build a refinery on the Vespine Geyser, which is a resource in StarCraft. And we need to have the command center produce 2 more SCVs. The third thing is to just continue creating those SCVs to gather resources until we have 6 or 7. Well, perfect. Okay, that's easy enough. Now, next we can look at the battle strategy, where we see that we need to have our barracks set to produce Marines until we have a group or squad of 12 ready to kick some Zergling butt. Okay, I have no idea if this was on purpose or not, but I just noticed that the battle strategy says to kick some Zergling butt, and the author said that, whereas Raynor says it's time to kick some serious butt. No idea if that was a coincidence or not, but either way, it's great and it lines up perfect. So let's get onto the mission and past all of these butts to the gameplay. Where one of the first things I do is send my SCV up north to build that refinery, just like the author said for the guidebook. And then right after that, I queue up some SCVs and I go ahead and will jump ahead a little bit here to where I double check that I have my 6 and I start making a 7th, because you know what? Anytime the author gives me a choice, I will go ahead and err on the side of having more. And from there, I start building those Marines, and I will also jump ahead here to where I get that magic 12 number that the author said. And per the guide, we can take them north to capture Backwater Station in the command center, including immediately building at least 3 or 4 fire bats each in the barracks that are up there. And by the way, really nice little bit of dialogue by Raynor here where he says, "What is this? It looks like the ground here is alive." I think this is a really nice bit of dialogue because this is the first time that we now know Raynor has come across this, and it's the first time, most likely, the player is coming across this as well. So when Raynor says that, it's a way of the developer saying, hey, you should really pay attention to this. This is something different and important. And when Raynor says, what is this? Look at the ground, it's alive. Make sure you, of course, need to get out your journal. Maybe you write a little thing in your diary at nighttime. Maybe you can take a selfie and then you can post it on social media. I think all of those are great options. And by the way, I think this could be a great time to mention the Marine, since now we get to see it in awesome action, because the Marine in StarCraft is really the most basic and entry-level unit you get when playing the Terrans. It's also the cheapest unit they have, as it only costs 50 minerals, and it's a really good all-around unit where if things get up close to them... Oh, I almost forgot, there's this nice fire bat line coming up here. Let's listen to that.
Need a light.
Such a great and iconic voice line. Just the voice acting in this and the atmosphere that everything brings to the table is incredible. I just love all of it so much. But anyway, going back to the Marines and how if units get up close to them, they will probably get absolutely destroyed. But if you have a nice group of them, they can attack both ground and the air. And of course, because they have a little bit of range, they're a really nice all-around unit that we see showcased here. I also decided to pause the video again because there are just so many little nuances that the developers thought of while making this. it's just so wonderful how many things they actually thought of in depth. So you see on the screen here, I have something highlighted called Research U-238 Shells, and it increases marine attack range. Now, this is such an amazing introductory mission, I think, as well, because we just captured Backwater Station, and they gave us this free building called Terran Academy. Well, these are the first upgrades that you come across in the game, and it's something that they're basically trying to point out to you, the developers, and saying, hey, if you want to get this, you can, but it's not required. A nice little touch that they gave us to highlight this. I also start to build those fire bats, which cost 50 minerals and 25 gas each, and you can see our total minerals and gas as well on the top right of the screen to point that out. And this could be a good time actually to point out that these fire bats cost 1 unit of supply. The same goes for those marines, and we can tell that our total supply is in the top right corner of the screen, which we are able to raise that cap of 36 when we build a supply depot, which you can see on the screen here. Now, I will jump ahead a little bit until I have those fire bats completed, and let's see what that author for the guidebook says we should do next. So now that we have our 2 groups, 8 to 12 Marines and at least 10 fire bats, I have both. We move the Marines southeast while the fire bat group follows up. It's very difficult to have the fire bats follow up, which you will see in the clip when I play it. But the scenario ends, he lets us know when we destroy the infested command center. So let's begin the attack. And first off, I send my Marines to do an attack order first, followed up by the fire bats. But of course the fire bats say, I don't care about any sort of strategy guide or what the player tells me to do. Let's go ahead and charge in first. So here you can see they're attacking, and well, a good showcase of their roughly melee abilities, so that's perfect. We then do one of the scariest things in all of StarCraft, which is of course attacking up a ramp. There's a couple reasons for that. Now, first, the pathing in StarCraft is not the best if you compare it to a modern game, just because of the age of the system. So the units can have a really difficult time going up. They can get clogged. It's a choke point. That's a huge reason. Now, second, when you're on lower ground in StarCraft and you attack above ground, in this case to the units on the higher ground up the ramp, there is a 47% or roughly 47% chance the units on the lower ground will miss. So that is a huge chance to not hit your target. So you really need a larger force to overtake that higher ground. That leads us to the end of the mission, and a Marine says, what did they do to that command center? Raynor responds that whatever it is, it's not natural, so better burn it. And of course, when we click on it, we see it's an infested command center, and thankfully, this is not a horror movie, otherwise Jim Raynor would put everybody in there and then they'd split up on their own separate ways and probably die or something like that. So thankfully, that's not the universe that we're living in right now. However, we do get an incoming transmission where Duke tells us that because we destroyed that Confederate installation, we have violated some sort of colonial law and we are all under arrest. Now, of course, Raynor says that if we hadn't done that, the entire colony would have been destroyed. But Duke reinforces that that does not make a difference, and we all need to throw down our weapons immediately. And Raynor replies, well, you know what, Duke? You're just a plain old pain in the booty. So, just like how any good mission should end, of course, it started with butts, and it's ending with butts. So, on to the score screen, and then on to the next mission. This is called Desperate Alliance. This is mission number 3, and you can see that we are still on the Mars Sara colony. Now, when we go to the mission debriefing screen, we see Duke is here, one of our favorite characters, of course. And he lets us know that he received some sort of a message from us, but he does not care at all about whatever Confederate regulations that we brought up based on him arresting Jim Raynor. So he says, you fringe world yokels are all alike, and we don't know where our loyalties lie. Then he tells us to have a great day. Well, thank you. We will have a great day. And I had no idea what yokels were, so I had to look it up. And apparently it's supposed to be some sort of an insult for people that live in the countryside. But, you know, to be honest, living in the countryside sounds nice and pleasant and peaceful. So we will take that as a compliment. But up next, we will see the adjutant, which is our AI helper, tells us that 16 outland stations have reported sighting Zerg, and the Confederacy is refusing to help as they have arrested all of the militia forces, and already 3 stations have fallen to this new enemy race called the Zerg. And there is no military relief except for an extremist faction known as the Sons of Korhal, and their liaison is on the other line. That is probably the only time I will ever say the word liaison, but it's fancy, and maybe I should add it to my vocabulary after this. Now we are introduced to Arcturus Mengsk, leader of the Sons of Korhal, and he lets us know that, of course, we are familiar with him based on Confederate propaganda surrounding him and his group. But he has an interesting proposition for us that he says he will lend us some transport ships to evacuate any survivors in the colony. And it sounds like Mengsk might have an ulterior motive, for example, when he says something like this.
If you decide to accept our help, you'll be branded as an outlaw too. But it's a chance to save those people. Time to make a stand, Magistrate.
I have to say, the voice actors have done such an amazing job with conveying these little subtleties with the characters, and the way that the director of these voice actors lined up some of this, and the director of the game, because we go right from Mengsk saying that to not really having a lot of time to digest what he just said, as we immediately see a priority alert that says the evacuation zone is now under attack by the Zerg. This lines up perfectly with the objective in the bottom left, that we have to survive for 30 minutes. And I think this is a great spot to jump into the mission and see what's ahead of us. And I believe all of you might know what is coming next, and that is the guide. So let's pull up the map and take a look. And starting at the bottom middle, we can see that that is where our base is in the starting position. If we move up north a little bit, we can see that we have a couple of spots to place bunkers. Now, we actually already have 2 bunkers in our original base, and I'll be honest, whenever I originally played this game, all the times I went through the campaigns, I always placed extra bunkers next to the ones that already existed, and you'll see that on the screen here where I circled them. But we will see how it turns out when I place them where the guide lets us know we should, because that is one of my goals of using the guide, and to see how this goes. Now, I believe we are all set to pull up the first part of the battle strategy. So, as we can see here, we're supposed to survive for 30 minutes, just like we saw earlier when we looked at the objectives. And we can see the author gives a couple of options. We can either be defensive and then sit tight, and that is something I always used to do as a kid. I would never attack out. I took this mission very seriously. But he gives us another option that we can go out and take an offensive stance, which he says will be more fun and also give us some invaluable experience in managing an attack force. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm going to make sure to do the attack stance because it sounds fun, and that managing an attack force is a great option that, who knows, maybe I can put it on a resume and it'll help at some point in the future. You never know. Also, we can't forget the resource management. So now that we have that up, we can see the author tells us we need to immediately set our command center to produce 4 new SCVs, while of course the others collect minerals, and then after we've got about 6 or 7 SCVs collecting minerals, we need to send one to repair the right-hand bunker and then have it build a refinery, because we don't need any more than 1 SCV collecting Vespene. So let's jump into the mission and actually see some of the gameplay. Right away, we get pulled over to the vulture that says, hey, this thing's on fire, referring to the bunker, and he lets us know that we can fix up his bike too. Nice little thing the developers did there, where if somebody just naturally figured out that buildings and mechanical units can be repaired earlier in the game, then perfect, they already know. But if someone didn't realize that just yet, it's specifically pointed out for them. We also have the Marine telling us, hey, we can get in the bunker, so that way everybody knows if they're a newer player that Marines can go in the bunkers for extra defense. Nice little tip for a newer player. As I'm building those SCVs, there are a couple of Zerglings that just happen to run on into my base, and I don't know what that is. Maybe they were going on their morning jog, just having a nice old time together, probably just enjoying a beautiful morning, and they stumble upon this base and immediately get killed. So that is not something I am extremely proud of, and let's move on right away to the next point, which can be that the author advises us to produce a couple more SCVs to do some construction as I have the other SCVs completed. He says to have one of those build supply depots and the other some more barracks. We'll also need an SCV to repair damage from occasional Zerg attacks. I think I was about to say parade. I don't know where that came from. Need an SCV to parade attacks. Okay, well, anyway. As I continue building up my infrastructure and getting some of those upgrades, supply depots, all of that good stuff, I repel some Zerg attacks here and there, and then I remember that I need to send out an SCV to build those bunkers in front of the bridge. So that's exactly what I start to do. I know earlier I had mentioned how StarCraft pathing can be a little bit challenging to work around when moving units up and down some of those ramps, but the same thing definitely applies when it comes to a bridge in StarCraft, and the unit pathing can be a little bit tough where units get stuck on each other. So I do think the bunker placement here is overall good. It's just that I think if I were to do this mission on my own and not doing the guide, probably would put them together like I mentioned earlier in the video, but I still believe this is a good place to do this. While I continue to repel a couple of Zerg attacks and also build up defenses and some attack force, let's actually bring up that second part of the battle strategy and see exactly how much I should build according to the author. So we see that we should have an attack force of 2, preferably 3 groups of 12 Marines each, and 1 group of 12 fire bats. So because he says preferably 3, I will definitely go with that. He also mentions that everything for the attack should be in place by minute 15. So let's see how close I can get to that mark. Speaking of time, it would be a good point, I believe, to mention the timer in the top middle of the screen, where the game shows us the amount of time that we have left until we are rescued. Of course, the developers didn't have to add that, and the time doesn't go down exactly 1 second in real time compared to the 1 second in game time. I am playing on, I think, the fastest speed, so I don't know exactly how that equates. I think 30 minutes equals roughly 22 minutes in real life time, but still, it's nice that they added that for us in general. While I'm building everything up, nice little showcase of the bunker and its defensive power that you can see on the screen here. Shortly after that, I'm attacked by another wave of Zerg, and this time, look at that. It's a new unit that is flying, and it seems to have some sort of a bouncing attack. Nice way that the developers added this new unit in to showcase, again for a player, adding something in a little bit at a time so they're not overwhelmed, and we're already playing defensively, so it's not a huge threat, but it's a great way to introduce that to a player. And say, hey, by the way, they have flying units now, so be careful. After that, I go back to minding my own business, continuing to build up a nice little sized army based on what the author's guidance is, and oh my gosh, all of a sudden, there is a huge... Okay, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it is a decent little attack wave that hits me and takes down my bunker. How could you do that? Oh no, and a Marine. Well, I guess I need to rebuild that. And, oh, also, by the way, I just realized this, but I love this little shop that's on the left-hand side that says something like Tracy's Armory. I'm pausing the video because I remember always imagining that if I could just go into that shop, I could get more Marines because they have the suits of armor in there. At least as a child, I always thought that. Now I just think it's awesome and amazing flavor that's added to the level and the scenery. I believe now would be a good time to pull up that third part of the strategy guide. So let's see what the author tells us as the final portion. He says that we need to group our units into groups of 12 and then move them out en masse. Marines should be first and then firebats following up. Now we will completely gloss over the fact that I forgot to go on the lower road in the upcoming clips and that I went on the upper road. But outside of that, he says to go do a sweeping motion that systematically wipes out the heart of the Zerg hive. At the beginning of the next paragraph, we see we should continue creating Marines at our base so we can use them as reinforcements as needed. And then the very last highlighted portion, we see to keep a few emergency units, probably Marines, hanging at the base for defense. I jump ahead a little bit here to where I am ready for the attack, and it's just about at the 13-minute mark, so we can see that my macro is a little bit behind. And for anyone not familiar with the term macro, I think it's short for macro economics or economies, something like that. But in the real-time strategy genre, it's used to determine or explain how well you're building your infrastructure, your buildings that help you produce more units, how well are you gathering resources and able to build your army. I think that's enough about the most exciting talk of economies and, macroeconomics, because there's a fight to be had here that you can see on the screen, which showcases what I mentioned earlier about bridges being so incredibly difficult to cross. But I don't know, this game is so amazing. Look at this. This is so incredible to see. Just what an achievement for something like 1998. Just incredible. Oh, I love this. After I wipe out those last few Mutalisks, which are the new unit that are flying for the Zerg, I then proceed to skip ahead just a little bit in order to attack the base fully and continue on into the Zerg infrastructure, which we now get to see the incredible power of sunken colonies, which is the static defense for Zerg that attacks ground only. And static defense, in case anyone isn't sure, just means that it does not move. Little side note, these things always kind of creeped me out when I was younger because it looks like a huge tongue that goes into the ground and then attacks somebody from underneath. It just always creeped me out. But it's incredibly creative, so I appreciate it for that. After I go through and defeat the main base of the Zerg, I then start systematically going throughout the map so I can find any stragglers, including buildings or just random units that might be around. And this is one thing where I would say that StarCraft does also show its age just a little bit, because in a modern game, you would probably have the design of the game or the level be that once you defeat the main base of the enemy, you just win because they can't do anything else to stop you. However, in this case, we do need to officially wait until the timer is done. We don't have any other win condition. We do have to wait. But that gives us some chances or some time to do something a little bit creative. One of those things is to build a base where the Zerg base used to be. So I have my command center and some SCVs queued up so I can start gathering resources because, I don't know, why not? And while I don't mind waiting for the timer to count down, it can actually be nice after an intense attack. I decide to do a little bit of something else because I have this huge army and not really anything to do with it. So I decide I'm going to spread everybody out as much as I can throughout the entire map so I can try and see if I'm able to get visibility on every piece of the mini map on the bottom left-hand side. I'm not gonna lie, it was actually a little bit more enjoyable than I thought it was gonna be, so it ended up being silly and enjoyable, and it just made it even more fun for me, so that was nice. I appreciated it. Now you all get to see the finished product, and oh wow, I was so close to filling out the entire map. There are just a couple of spots, and of course there are some water zones where I wasn't able to place units just yet. But I place everybody just in time for the advisor to let us know the Sons of Korhal dropships are approaching, which then leads us to the victory message and the victory screen. And there we are, completely done with Mission 3. So far, the guide has been absolutely incredible. I know these are relatively easier missions, but I think it's been going really well, and it's been extremely helpful with some of the tips and advice it's given. Something I just realized is the elapsed time on the bottom left says 7 minutes and 47 seconds. I didn't catch that until now while recording this. I have no idea why it only says that time. That is so bizarre because the in-game timer was 30 minutes. And I know that when Blizzard created the game that they sped up the in-game time compared to real-life time, so 1 second in-game doesn't equal that time on the outside of the game. But there's no way that it's 7 minutes and 47 seconds. Well, I have no idea why, but oh well. Anyway, that's the end of Mission 3, so next up, of course, we're jumping into Mission 4. This is called the Jacobs Installation, and we are still on the Marsara colony, and this is only 3 hours after that colonial evacuation that we just did in the last mission. We are advised that our tenure as a magistrate is suspended. Oh no! And it's pending an official investigation with our affiliation with the Sons of Korhal. However, Raynor comes in and lets us know that Arcturus's boys sprung him from the prison ship. And I assume by Arcturus's boys, he means the men that Arcturus commands and not some sort of little children that Arcturus has, some of his actual young children boys. I don't think he has any, but that would be incredibly impressive if that was the case. But after that, we are told by Arcturus that Marsara is almost completely overrun by the Zerg, and the Confederates are abandoning the planet, but so are the Sons of Korhal. However, there is something Arcturus wants to do before everybody leaves. And that is to raid the colony's Confederate outpost and retrieve whatever weapons schematics that we can find in their networks inside of this Jacobs installation. And because of the chaos with the Confederates' evacuation of the planet, we shouldn't have too much trouble getting all of the information out of the installation, so that should be our next mission. And I think this is a great time to jump into it. And before I forget, I want to point out the objectives on the bottom left-hand side, where we need to retrieve data disks from the Confederate network, and Raynor must survive, of course. Once we're in the mission, we actually see we don't need to build anything, we just have some units here, so this is a great time to pull up that good old strategy guide, and let's see the map. This is another one of those times where the guide comes in extreme handy, and I appreciate having this picture so much. We can see that we start in the bottom right, and it gives us some arrows to show exactly where we need to go. Looks like there's a couple of areas that are circled where we probably have to move our units as well, and then there are some teleporters, and it labels all of that too. Because this is a maze, it's really nice to see that we don't actually have to just guess and then try different wrong areas or pathways. We can just keep going and follow the path that the author gave us. While we don't have any official guide for the resource management, that doesn't need to be pulled up on this mission because we don't build anything. There is a large battle strategy section that you'll see on the screen, but there's only a couple of highlighted portions because there's really not a lot of information to go over that's relevant to us. Only the first thing that you see highlighted, which is we'll encounter some hidden floor and wall mounted guns and missile turrets, and to stay calm. Well, thank you. Really great advice, probably for every mission or just everywhere in life in general. Stay calm so you can make the best decision possible. On to the next little bit, we see just move northwest. And one of the things I didn't highlight, but the author says we have only a 70% chance of hitting when we're on lower ground. So couple of things, because I know I mentioned a different number earlier in the video, but the author may have been given possibly incorrect information at the time, or it was right at the time and it was actually changed afterwards to be that roughly 47% chance to miss when you're on lower ground. But going to the last section, we see that he says to be sure to activate any beacons we come across as we wind through the installation. And that's that. I think we're ready to go into the mission. One of the first things I do as I begin is group all of my units so I can have them in one attack group. And we see we're joined by Jim Raynor, who must have parked his Vulture outside and probably put a do not touch sign on it. And basically right away, we see a wall-mounted gun that attacks us and kind of surprises us because we're not really expecting that. We've never seen that unit type before. In fact, we don't know anything what to expect on this level now that we had that happen to us. I think that's a great design choice because the developers are trying to say, hey, just be careful, you don't know what you'll come across. It could be anything, really. And along the same lines as that good design choice, how did I actually know it was Jim Raynor that's joining us? Well, in the group of units, you can definitely see his portrait in the bottom middle underneath the menu button. That's not all though. We of course see that his unit color is teal, so he's different than all of the other red units in our group. And also at the bottom middle, we see that every unit is surrounded by a blue box, but we have one unit surrounded by white. That denotes it's a hero unit, and so we also can tell, oh, that must be Jim Raynor, our hero. And that's all great design choices, so I think that's wonderful they did that. This is a perfect opportunity for me to also point out, as I click on the Firebat, it has 3 upgrades on defense and attack. So what the developers did in this case is they gave us a small group of units that are incredibly powerful. And they did this because they probably thought that people would most likely stumble around in this maze, not always knowing the right way. And what if somebody always chose the wrong path? Well, then they have strong units to try and make up for that. Right after that, we come across a unit named Civilian that insults our units by calling them scum. And in a slight overreaction, our units just immediately kill them. But without having any time to even process that, we actually see some Zerg and think, what are they doing here? Raynor has the same idea. But Minsk comes in and tells us that over a year ago, he saw that the Confederates were holding Zerg in pens, and they must have known about it for some time now, and that for all we know, they could be breeding the things, which honestly doesn't sound too bad. I mean, maybe they're breeding them for beauty contests, or to see which ones can run the fastest, to get gold medals. Who knows? But that's probably not the case. As we're considering all the possibilities, Minx says that we'll just deal with the Zerg another day, and to keep moving on. So I do just that by going back to the main hallway and crossing to the other side, where I step on another beacon that then says automatic defense system deactivated. So that should make our lives a little bit easier and not have to deal with as much defense. I skip ahead a little bit to where we see a sneaky little flamethrower at the bottom of a set of stairs. Once I clear that, and also the units that are at the top, we see a teleporter pad, which I think ties really nicely into the entire sci-fi element and atmosphere that we have going on. It fits in perfectly with that. I'm able to clear the units really easily, and as I get to the end of the hallway, I realized I never used the Marines and Firebat's ability, which is called Stimpack, and I'm putting it on the screen so you can see that it shows what it does, as it doubles their rate of fire and increases their movement speed for a short period of time. Now, they do take 10 damage per use of Stimpack, and in the original StarCraft, there is no way to heal your units, so it is very case specific, which is why I almost never use it, to be honest. But we step on the beacon and find out that we have the plans, and Raynor says to get the transports ready because we're ready to head out. And that ends this mission, so it looks like we're all set again to go to the next one, Mission 5. But I do feel like this is a great place to stop at the end of Mission 4, and I have already loved this process so much of going through all of these missions and the guide and figuring out to see how things work. It's just been so enjoyable, and I've really been loving it. I can't say that enough. So I truly appreciate anyone that's been watching up to this point, and thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are.